Welcome to Analysis. I'm John Rees. Now, exactly a year ago, a new phase in the history of the Middle East began. On October the 7th last year, Hamas attacked Israel, killing over 1,000 people. Israel then invaded Gaza, and many more Palestinians than Israelis would die over the ensuing 12 months. Over 42,000 people to date, and still more die every single day. That was and is a tragedy, but it is also part of a longer struggle. Indeed, more Palestinians than Israelis have died in every single year since the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. But now something new and even more disastrous is happening. Israel is inflicting the same death and destruction on its northern neighbour, Lebanon. Simultaneously, it is attacking both Syria and Yemen, and is on the brink of a sustained conflict with Iran. A year ago, few would have predicted that Israel would fight on at least 4 fronts and risk an all-out war in the Middle East, engaging the major powers if it were to do so. So, how near is that prospect? Has the United States lost control of its watchdog in the Middle East? Will Iran be sucked into a sustained war? Well, joining me to discuss all this is Dr Ghada Karmi, Palestinian author and academic. Ghada Karmi, welcome to the programme. Thank you for joining us. Let's first start with what's happening in Gaza. 42,000 deaths, 68% of the buildings in the Gaza Strip destroyed. But has Israel attained its goal of defeating Hamas?
No, it clearly hasn't. And that's part of the problem for Israel, is that with all this death and destruction, and having made Gaza uninhabitable, having killed so many of its people, Israel it does not appear to have um, done anything to stop Hamas from resisting. So I don't know how Israel would measure success in this sense, but clearly Hamas is not defeated, and they are still fighting, and they are still around. And Yahya Sinwar, their leader, is still alive and has evaded, frenetic Israeli efforts to try and assassinate him. Uh, that's the situation so far. So no, Israel has not succeeded in Gaza.
And how do you read what's been happening in the West Bank? Because the war on Gaza has also gone alongside increased repression of the Palestinians in the West Bank, increased settler activity. How do you read the balance of forces in the West Bank?
Well, you see, we could cut a long story short by saying that what Israel has always wanted is the land of Palestine without the people of Palestine. So really, all its efforts from 1948 until this day have been directed at that end. If they can take as much of Palestinian land as possible, while at the same time getting rid of the inhabitants of Palestine. That's their aim. There never was another aim to Zionism except that. So they now glimpse a golden opportunity, which will not be repeated quickly, in which they've been allowed to do whatever they want, to bomb and kill at will, and supported by the United States and other European countries. This is a fantastic opportunity. They are trying as fast and as completely as possible to expel the occupants of the Palestinian territories. Now, in Gaza, they had been hoping all along that Egypt would take the people of Gaza. Well, that hasn't worked because the Egyptians have refused. On the West Bank, their aim is also equally transparent. They want to expel the people of the West Bank to go to Jordan. And now Jordan has refused. So, what are they left with? they're left with the option of making life so impossible, so difficult, so fraught with danger that they imagine people will leave of their own accord. But it's a doomed enterprise because we're talking about 7 million Palestinians between Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem, 7 million people. Well, even if you try to expel some of them, how are you going to get rid of all of them? But that doesn't. The trouble is that the impossibility of realizing the end point doesn't stop Israel from continuing to kill and to work towards that particular end.
And how do you see this new extension of the war, new phase, as the Israeli ministers are calling it, to try and deal with, again, in their words, the ring of fire of all Israel's opponents in the areas, beginning with Lebanon?
Yes, look, I talked about the Zionist aim for Palestine, which was to get the land without the people. Okay, now they have I can only call it a fantasy about the Middle East region, in which what they would like to do is to vanquish all their opponents. Now, there are opponents in Hezbollah, from Lebanon, and there are opponents in Iran. So the way that this works for them is that they've now moved their war onto Lebanon with the aim of, as they imagine, destroying Hezbollah. At the same time, they have provoked Iran repeatedly and tried to get it to enter the war um, because they know that the United States, which is there, its aircraft carriers, its naval destroyers, they're all there in the Mediterranean. So, here's another golden opportunity, which they cannot forego. So, if they, as they imagine, if they can provoke Iran into attacking them, then they have the United States on hand, and the United States will not allow for Israel to be damaged beyond repair. So, all the pieces are in place from their point of view for a victory in the Middle East. Now, going on with the Israeli fantasy, if they succeed in vanquishing all their foes in the region. And now the Arab states, they don't take any account of because the Arab states are pacified. Many of them have peace agreements with Israel anyway, and the rest are inactive and quite passive. So here we are, there's no opposition. The only opposition is in those areas we've just talked about. So according to the Israelis, if they can cancel this opposition on these hotspots of resistance to them, then they will emerge as the ruler of the Middle East. It's as simple as that. They will dominate the Middle East region.
And let's examine what exactly this kind of golden opportunity, as you describe it, is. Is that partly a result of the American political system being paralyzed by the presidential election? Doesn't seem to be much very powerful decision making going on there. It's clear that the Americans aren't willing to flatly contradict or to effectively prohibit arms being sent to Israel. But on the other hand, Biden, wanted to produce a kind of plan where there was a ceasefire in return for Saudi recognition of Israel. That was brushed aside by Netanyahu. Practically every suggestion that Biden has made has been brushed aside by Netanyahu. The only red lines the Americans seem to have is that Israel um, shouldn't and can't attack the nuclear facilities of Iran and shouldn't and attack the oil facilities of Iran. I mean, we can wonder at the hypocrisy of it being okay to destroy Palestinian lives, but not okay to destroy Iranian oil. But nevertheless, there seem to be some parameters there, but not many.
No, and you see, I mean, we are aware indeed that a U.S. election is coming up, and I suppose the Israelis imagine that the political process in the United States is paralyzed more than usual because, of course, we know that there is a powerful pro-Israel lobby operating in the United States. So, in any event, it's not a promising place in terms of Middle East peace. However, given an upcoming election, the argument would go that whichever side is able to demonstrate its loyalty and devotion to Israel, then that will help the cause of the election in America. So, I mean, that's what the theory is. I really am very dubious about this theory. And I'll tell you why, because I cannot see that either of the candidates, whoever wins, whether it's Harris or whether it's Trump, they have the same policy on Israel. I don't know what more they need to demonstrate. So I don't think it makes that much difference. However, that's how the received wisdom is. But you see, in the end, this whole situation, um, I think, because of October 7th, because October 7th blew up a lots of assumptions which had made the so-called international community comfortable. Assumptions that Israel would go on um, sort of being reprimanded for taking Palestinian land, but it would do it anyway. And at the same time, um, people could go on talking about the two-state solution so that everyone feels much better. On the one hand, you know, the two-state solution proposes you don't molest Israel. Israel stays in 78% of historic Palestine, and the rest, the so-called occupied territories, become a Palestinian state. That is the two-state solution. So what had been happening up until October 7th was that um, these parameters were accepted by politicians in the West and in the Arab world, so that, you know, how can we put it? Israel remains intact, but the Palestinians get something too. So everybody feels rather better about that. And that's why they keep mentioning the two-state solution. Now, I know that one moved the subject on, but what I think we need to talk about the two-state solution. But the point I wanted to make was that up until October 7th, that was the assumption, and that this would go on indefinitely. Now, there was only one factor that had to not change, which is that the Palestinians would continue to tolerate these terrible conditions, being under occupation on the West Bank, being besieged in Gaza. So if they went on quietly accepting that situation, the rest was great. You know, what's not to like? October 7th, of course, blew all that up. No more would it be the case. That's what the operation amounted to, that, among other things, it would no longer be the case that the Palestinians will accept passively what had been decided for them. And they'd broken out of the jail that is Gaza, and they had demonstrated to the world that they exist, that they have demands, and that they are not afraid of making those demands, translating that into military action. So that's really what the message, a very important message of October 7th.
So let's have a look at where we've got to now in respect of all the unfolding consequences of that. Um, do you believe that there will be a sustained military conflict now, a war, in other words, between Iran and Israel?
Well, I'm afraid it's sort of looking that way, isn't it? It's looking as if Israel will not be able to resist the chance, the opportunity of drawing Iran into the war. And, we've seen Netanyahu is quite prepared to go it alone, at least initially, but then gets into trouble and, of course, calls out for help from the United States. So this pattern is established. Now, I don't put it past him to uh, go all out to attack uh, Iran's maybe oil fields, but much more likely, I think, the nuclear sites. That, in Israel's estimation, would mean that Iran could not fail to respond. That's really a red line. And so, of course, Iran then would respond, and then Israel would get a hammering, and it would call on the United States to come to its aid. That, I'm afraid, is looking very likely, that scenario.
Mm,
Clearly, we may be wrong. Very many, and very often when I've been asked about predictions, which way is this going? I've said consistently, it's actually impossible to say because
mm,
there's so many factors. There are so many actors involved. It's any one of them.
mm,
If they changed, if any one of these actors acted in a different way, or if all the various factors changed. I'll give you an example. We know that the Israeli economy is battered. It's doing extremely badly, and the continuation of a war is not going to improve it. It'll make it much worse. So, here's one scenario where you could imagine that at some point the Israelis would have to withdraw a little bit from the warlike activities because there won't be enough money, there are not enough men to fight. I mean, these logistical factors are really important. So that's one, just one factor that comes to mind.
mm,
And presumably there are many others.
mm. So, would you say that in a way, one of those factors is whether or not the Americans can get the Israelis to limit their reaction to attacks which fall short of Iran's red lines? You said an attack on the nuclear facility would be a red line. Perhaps attacks on the oil facilities would be a red line. If the Israelis can be limited to an attack which falls short of that, then perhaps we are less likely to see an all-out conflict. If they cannot be, and we know the Americans haven't been very successful at restraining the Israelis so far, then we're in a different and more dangerous place.
Yeah, I fear the worst. The trouble is, I know what you're saying, and I think that makes sense. If you're the United States and you can see this attack dog straining at the leash, you might give it, half a pound of meat as opposed to a ton of meat. And so, with any luck, that would shut it up for a bit. This would be a sort of the position of people who've got some sense. However, I am not comfortable about this. I'm not sanguine because you see, if you put yourself in Netanyahu's position, he has been extremely audacious. He has struck all out to do things which are against every kind of law, every kind of human rights norm, every kind of norm of international behavior. He's gone out of his way to challenge them, to smash them. He doesn't care. Now, if you like, if you put yourself in his shoes, he's almost within sight of the prize which is drawing Iran in and getting the Americans to do the fighting for Israel. That must be irresistible. I can't imagine that Netanyahu would stop thinking like that. But you see, at the same time, you'd think, wouldn't you, that the United States could exercise leverage and just say to the Israelis, look, no, you're not going to do this because no more arms, no
Mm.
more funds. I can't see them doing it either.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's right. I think we're in a very or historically unusual situation because we know in the past the Americans have on two other occasions confronted the Israelis when they wanted to attack Iran nuclear facilities, have said no, and the Israelis have accepted it. And I think it's right to say that that calculation is no longer necessarily automatically, perhaps probably functioning in this situation because you know Netanyahu has jumped the shark. He's arrived at a place where previous Israeli leaders, extreme though they might have been in their own era, haven't dared go.
No, that's right. And you see, add to that the fact that we've got the dying days of President Biden's administration. Now, President Biden has shown himself totally unable to resist Israel. So, he's still in power in America. And that's what I mean by Israel's golden opportunity. Because by the time that there's an election and various things are happening in America, that moment will have been lost. So he is, I would think, desperate to draw Iran in. What he's doing at the moment, or what the Israeli army is doing, is bashing Beirut and other Lebanese towns so as to keep Hezbollah at bay, busy with the damage, with the destruction. That's the sort of interim rapid calculation. And then Iran will come up. So I don't know, of course, I can't set a time on it, but I can, this is the way it works out. There
Okay.
is something, yeah.
Okay, my thanks. Dr. Ghada Karmi, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to have you on the programme, but I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on this edition of Analysis. Of course, we will be on the Watchtower, watching how the events develop in the Middle East and bringing the news to you as soon as we have it. But for Analysis tonight, that's all we have. Good night.